This is the Leaders on Fire podcast. On this show, we'll be inviting guests in to talk about crucible moments in their lives and unpack how it developed character and perseverance and how they emerged as leaders on fire. We hope that this podcast is an encouragement and an inspiration to you. Man, today I'm excited. We have my good friend, Riley Fuller, who's going to be joining us. I've known Riley for about 10 years. Our lives have crossed paths so many different times on different projects, and Riley is an inspiration to me, and I can assure you his story will be an inspiration for you as well. So let's welcome Riley to the show. Riley, man, I'm super pumped to have you on the podcast, man. You've been such an awesome friend of mine for many years. I think it's maybe been probably a little over 10 years, I think, when we first really started to get to know each other. You've been a mentor to me in my life. You've been a great friend. You've been an encouragement, a supporter. You're one of the few guys I know that I could call anytime to talk about truly anything. So I appreciate you tons. Super pumped to have you on the show, man.
Likewise, brother. Really excited to be here.
Sweet. All right, so let's start by lighting the fire. Riley, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, well, Drew, I'm so excited to be here. You and I have done so many fun, exciting, strange things together in life that this is right down the center. I am, most importantly, I'm a believer in Jesus. He's my orienting North Star. I'm a husband. I've been married for 10 years to my beautiful Persian princess, Nazli. And we have 3 kids, 10, 6, and 4, 2 boys and a girl. I love the idea that we can help people in practical ways make their lives better. And so, that we're all given like this pot of energy that we can use, and it could be selfish, it could be unselfish, it could be effective, ineffective, and I like mine to be unselfish and effective, especially like during my professional time. So as you know, you and I and our friend Ben co-founded Generous Coffee. Generous just put in an awesome store and a roastery here in Warsaw. I'm also the founder of Humanity and Hope United. Humanity and Hope United, what we do is there's this problem for a lot of people called the birth lottery. The fact that our souls come from God here into reality in ways that we don't have any agency, we don't have any choice over it. And for people like you and I, that's mostly a great thing, but for somebody who's born without electricity or schools or jobs that employ their parents or governments that can help keep them safe and healthy, then the birth lottery can be the most destructive thing ever. And so what we try to do with Humanity and Hope is to create a solution for the birth lottery. And we call that solution a mindset called hope. Hope is the mixture of belief and action. So saying, having a goal and then not just believing that it's true, but acting like it. Goals, agency, and pathways. So I do a little bit of that. I love to play soccer. I love to skateboard, surf, try to pick up a new hobby every year. I may follow in your steps in Ironman triathlons at some point.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a little bit about me.
You shouldn't have said that because now I'm going to be after you about it.
Well, I see what you got going on, and I know you've been doing it for a while, and your father-in-law has too. But yeah, there's something that's catching my eye.
Awesome, man. Well, you know what? It's pretty cool, and it's kind of ironic the timing of this podcast because I was just in Honduras last week with your team. Man, it was an amazing experience. I think that was maybe my 6th or 7th time down there. Only my 2nd time ever down there without you. The first time I was down there was way back in 2006, actually with your family, except you.
Right.
And maybe you can share a little bit about that in a minute. I was down there in 2000, maybe 5 or 6 with your family, your brothers and your mom and dad. That was the only time I was down there without you, and then last week. But we've gone down a handful of times together. I've enjoyed that time with you. But man, your team down there is awesome. And being able to go into the different villages that Humanity and Hope United is working in and seeing the impact was really, really amazing for our family to see that work. So let's warm things up a little bit and let's fan the flame. Tell us kind of why and how, what led you to start Humanity and Hope United? And maybe even talk a little bit about why you weren't on that trip in 2006 when I was, and kind of what happened and how that led into starting H&H.
I try to be really honest when I talk about my involvement with nonprofit and altruistic stuff, trying to help other people. It's definitely not where I started. When I was a kid dreaming about my life, it's not what I ever dreamed about. I mean, I don't think that I thought about service one time until I was in my 20s. And which I'm not proud of, but this is just for anybody who's listening to this who also doesn't feel very unselfish or servant-hearted. Like, I feel like I'm cut from the same cloth. I know what that feels like. So the way I started with Humanity and Hope was I'm going to give you like a 2-minute version. But I had a great upbringing here in Warsaw on Lake Tippecanoe. Spent most of my time playing sports and being on the lake, boating, wakeboarding, tubing. I spent my entire childhood trying to be an athlete. I wanted to play basketball, but I ended up getting a scholarship to play soccer. And I took it, but I ended up foregoing that scholarship for a girl. Then she cheated on me, like within 2 months into college. So everything that I'd ever poured my heart into was taken away from me immediately. And then I didn't have the relational skills to be able to talk to people I was close with. I'd just moved to college, so I didn't have anybody around me who I was really close with. And I went deeply into addiction. I had some predisposition in my family. Ended up getting kicked out of that school, decided to go into investment banking, made that my focus in life. I didn't go on that first trip that you went on because my parents asked me if I wanted to, and I'm like, y'all must be crazy. I don't see the point in this. And so I didn't go, but I did end up getting in trouble. I got arrested a few times. I wrecked my dad's car, and he used the influence that he had left with me to get me on that trip to Honduras. I never wanted to go. And even when he brought me, I came pretty unwillingly. And you know that you got kids, you know what unwilling children are like. Yeah. They may come, but they're certainly not going to enjoy it. They're going to be fighting you every second. And that's how I was going on to my first trip to Honduras.
Was that the next year?
That was the following. Yeah, yours was 2006. This must have been 2007. Yeah. So I went very unwillingly. But when I landed, I think within 15 minutes of leaving the airport, we go to this first community, this idea of a birth lottery. I show up, somebody had just gotten macheted on their leg. You know, all the houses are made out of temporary materials. There's clearly no sanitation or electricity. And I'm thinking, I'd only had selfish thoughts up to this point. And I'm thinking like, oh my God, I have made it. Like I am a winner in life in a way that I had never considered before. And so that captured my curiosity. I'd only been thinking about sports and business and making money. It captured my curiosity. I traveled back to Honduras the following summer because I knew that I had this investment banking job in hand and I just had time to kill and I didn't want to let my addictions get the best of me. So anyway, I moved down to Honduras. I got fired from the nonprofit I was volunteering for. It didn't work out. That was my entry into Honduras. And then 3 years later, after my career was in full gear and I was really feeling like my soul was just scraping the bottom of existence and really starting to think some suicidal thoughts. That's when when I had nothing else to like think about or hold on to, that's when the idea came rushing back in my mind. It was like God put it there, even though I wasn't a believer at that point. It was like, this was your purpose and you saw it and you felt it, but you didn't want it. And in that moment, I remembered, and that's when I started to pursue. That's when I started to build Humanity and Hope at that point.
Man, that's crazy. So you were pursuing the things of this world because you weren't a believer at this point, but you were pursuing the things of this world. Investment banking was lucrative for you, and you were snorting and drinking and whatever else, smoking away your earnings. I don't know, having a good time, but that led, even though you had all basically everything you could have probably wanted, it led you to a point of despair. And that's where you're talking about that breaking point where you're like, I need something more meaningful and purposeful because this is not it. And so that's when you started.
That's when I started Humanity and Hope.
Awesome, man. I love that story. Now, you started Humanity and Hope. You were not a believer yet. And I don't know if you're going to talk about this in the Crucible section when we crank up the heat. If you're not going to share that story, maybe briefly tell about, you started the organization and you had this felt need and you knew this was something that you should do. You weren't sure what it was compelled by at that point in time. You just knew you were supposed to do that.
Right.
At what point did the light bulb go off that this love that you felt you wanted to share for the people? When did you realize where the source of that was coming from, and how did it shift your thinking?
Yeah. Well, thankfully, there's a really direct answer to that. I started Humanity and Hope in 2010. It was like the idea of the birth lottery, the thought of treating your program beneficiaries, is what they're called in the nonprofit world, treating them as customers or family is what we called it in my family business, was another nuance that I wanted to bring into it. And then the idea of having more than one area of investment, 6 pillars. Those were the things that I thought that we could do differently. And that's the reason that I started it in the very beginning, is because I thought it could be effective in helping solve the birth lottery. Like you said, what I didn't know was why. Like, why do I care about this? Like, this has nothing to do with my well-being or my interests or even the things that I thought were my values up to that point. You know, like, why would this be my thing? And for a while, for the first 3 years, from 2010 to actually 4 to the end of 2013, I'm a big follow my gut kind of person, you know, and I could just feel God had given me the gift to know that this was my thing even before I knew him. And I'd been trying really hard in a lot of different ways to make these programs successful. And I had found out that it was a loving attitude, you know, or treating people at least equal, hopefully superior to yourself, that was the fuel that made these things work. And I called that love. I knew that was love. And then one day, this is November 29th of 2013, I was flying home for Thanksgiving, flight gets canceled. I read through all the books I have. I love to read. And then the next day, it was a Spirit flight. So the next day, or maybe 2 days later, when it gets rescheduled, the only thing I have to read is a devotional that my dad had downloaded on my phone for me. And you'll probably know this. I think it's 1 John 4:18. But there's a verse that says that God is love. And I read that in that devotional book, and I was like, in one moment, it's like, that's what I've been looking for. That's the fuel. You know, I'd always had these big barriers to God because of basically just the expressions that I'd grown up around in church, and the fact that all humans are so human and everybody fails. And I put that on God, I guess, instead of people. And so, but in that moment, when I had my barriers down and when I read that God is love, I thought, oh, like if that's who Jesus's Father is, if that's who the Christian God is, I'm all in. You know, and it feels like a gift. Like, even as I tell it, it's like, well, I probably had read that multiple times before, but in that moment, it hit my vulnerable heart.
Yeah.
And I have been all in ever since.
Man, that's awesome. And you were 27 or so?
I was 29.
29, okay. So the thing, I want to just mention this because it's encouraging to parents, and it's personally, I've fallen back on this a number of times. So hopefully it's okay we've used your life as an example when we're talking, my wife and I are talking about raising our kids, because your dad, he continued to persist and plant seeds and invite you in, give you books, and you resisted it. I mean, you've told me that. You said, hey, sometimes they would be having a Bible study. I would have nothing to do with it. I'd go into a different room. But your dad was faithful, and he just continued fertilizing the soil. And for 29 years, I'm guessing your dad, Denny, was prayerfully waiting for the day. And it came in an unexpected way, probably. But it was something that one of his little things that he just continued to do. So I think as parents, for us who are dads, we've got kids, you know, they don't always receive it right away, you know? And so even when we were through some turbulent times with our own children, you know, going through teenage years, I kept thinking of your story, Riley, going, God has a purpose and a plan, and he will use these things. And there is an appointed time when my kids will choose to follow the way, and they'll surrender their life over. I would love for that to be right now, but there's something else going on. And it's just an encouragement to those because that all makes who you are as a person. That's your story. That's part of you being a masterpiece created in God's image, right? All those things were part of your story. And so it's an encouragement to me as a parent, and I hope it encourages others who maybe have children who are wayward or rebellious, even into their 20s, that don't lose hope, right? Don't lose hope. God is faithful, and continue to just be there for your kids and love them like your dad always was for you. I mean, I'm sure he got mad at you a few times, right?
Amen. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my dad.
Yeah.
So I could go all into that message that you're sharing and even more. But obviously, God is our Father. Anyway, I'm choking up because of emotion thinking about my dad. I wouldn't be here without my dad. It was not always fun for him. In fact, most of the times, especially between like 18 and 29, it was probably really unpleasant. I mean, there were times when I was a kid, and my dad knows this, we've talked about it. He's my best friend now. But there were times when I actively would try to do mean, bad things to my dad as a son. And my dad, humanly, but he absorbed it, and he kept his love for me. And that ended up being, and God used that to bring that devotion that ended up saving my soul.
Yeah,
So.
it's so amazing, and it is so encouraging. I've got a couple adult children now, and it's more difficult because they're out from underneath your wing, right? I mean, so it's even more difficult because you watch the destruction happen and you can't do anything about it. And so anyways, I just wanted you to know that, man, that your story has been an encouragement to me as a parent, the way your dad navigated that with you, and to see where you're at today. And so hopefully it's encouragement to others. All right, so you ready to enter the crucible?
Oh, I'm ready.
We're going to crank up the thermostat. We're going to crank up the heat. And we're going to talk about the crucible, a moment in your life where the heat was cranked up. We think of maybe the ultimate crucible scenario. Well, first of Christ himself, what he experienced in the crucible moment, and the glory that came following that when he became truly a leader on fire, and he emerged from the resurrection, and he has his rightful place now. But we can also think of the human of Job, right? Everybody knows the story of Job and the crucible he was in. That was really difficult. And so a crucible is that time in life where the heat is cranked up, and God is using that to refine, to melt away the impurities, to melt away the things that are distracting us from loving God fully with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And when we're in those crucible moments, it's usually unpleasant. And we usually are praying desperately, Lord, I just want to get out of this. I want to get out of whatever the circumstance is. Please get me out of this. And sometimes that goes on for minutes, hours, days, weeks, sometimes months, maybe even sometimes years. But the crucible, we endure hardship as discipline because it produces fruit. It produces character. It produces all these wonderful things. It just really sucks when we're in it. So, entering the crucible, Riley, share with us a season or a moment in life where the crucible was very difficult, and how you emerged, and basically you're able to look back on that season now and how you feel it shaped you.
I've got plenty of examples to choose from in my life. But the one that I think would be most relevant here is probably, it's about 10 years ago. And so I started Humanity and Hope in 2010, and this happened in 2014. So I had a full-time job for the first 4 years. I kept my corporate job. I kept getting promoted. I never really thought that the nonprofit game would be my full-time thing. And anyway, Humanity and Hope ended up growing. And more importantly, it actually ended up starting to help people, especially through economic development. And so each time I would go back down, well, I guess in conjunction, it started bringing people down to visit. Mm-hmm. So started making a difference and bringing people to see it. And I was one of those people, both experiencing it and then coming to watch it. And so it started pulling more and more of my soul into it, and yet less and less of my income. I mean, I was giving money to this thing. It was difficult financially. And then I felt the call that, like, this is what my energy is for. This is what my time is for. This is what some of the best parts of me, I didn't have a family at that point yet. This is what the best parts of me are for. So I started figuring out how to leave the corporate world, how to change all these expectations I had about my retirement account and my income and where I could live and what I could drive. And then anyway, I ended up getting to a point where I gave it all up. Left the corporate world, I wasn't a believer yet, ended up moving in with my girlfriend. I'll take you through like 5-minute version of the story. Moving in with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, so it ends up being a good story. I go all in on my relationship and humanity and hope. She and I break up on my birthday. So I moved back from Texas to Indiana. I never wanted, at that point when I was young, to live in Indiana because I didn't, my parents had a business here, and I felt like if I was working for my parents' business, then I was taking the easy way out. And so anyway, I lose my job, I lose my girlfriend, I move in with my parents, and then I become a believer. It was a really, really tough time. Found out that my girlfriend, now my wife, was pregnant. So had to figure out, okay, am I going to leave Indiana? Am I going to be a present father? Am I going to try to get married? We ended up getting married. Our son has congenital complications. He had to get skull surgery. At the same time, I'm fundraising for humanity and hope while not even taking a salary. I would have been paying myself. And so I'm trying to figure out if this career can even be sustainable, navigating a new marriage that I wasn't expecting to be in, parenting a child with really serious health challenges, and I also wasn't expecting to be a parent at that time. And I just remember for probably 4 years, especially when the dry parts of the funding cycle would come, which is usually like August, September, or it was back then, I remember I would pray to God, like, I know that you have told me to follow you in this way. I know that you've given me special instructions and a special vision and a download to my heart, and yet it doesn't look like anything's happening. And it actually looks like the more that I'm obedient, maybe the worse my life gets, at least in the short term. And then I remember on top of that, I started to have sort of unfaithful thoughts about my calling, about my career. I'm like, well, maybe I should go back into trying to make money. And so I started dabbling my foot in that, and I got a job offer that would have been like multiple times what I was making before. They were going to give me a car, they were going to give me a house, but the catch was I live in Austin. It was in Dallas, so it was 3 hours, 4 days a week, 3 hours away from my wife and my newborn. And so that was the crucible for me, or one of them. I mean, I've had more than one, but that was a crucible. It's like, will I really keep trying for this when I don't see it? Will I take an easy way out? I mean, honestly, I was praying for God to release me. I wasn't going to be dishonest about it or leave if he didn't tell me to. But constantly, I was saying, God, this doesn't seem like you're here. Let me out of this. I don't enjoy it. This isn't where I want to be. This is never what I dreamed of. So that was the crucible for
How
me.
long was that season?
Well, it definitely started in 2013, and I would say the most intense part of that season lasted through 2015, probably 2 years. The most intense part of it, but I would say overall that season lasted until like COVID.
Yeah, I'm wondering too. I feel like I remember I was driving south. I think it's in Nashville or something. I feel like I was on the phone with you during this time. It might have been 2014, and I remember you struggling with. I remember thinking, "Oh man, I think he's gonna like give this up." I don't remember the conversation specifically, but I do remember being in the car and driving south on I-65, and we were having a phone call. It was early in our relationship, and I just remember you were really contemplating, is this something that you could, because the finances it wasn't making sense. You weren't getting a salary at that time, and it was a really difficult season. And I think it was right around in that same time period. I don't know if you remember that or not, but
I remember just being like your little brother and just being like sad and kind of like just venting my my sadness to you.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. And so, how long? I know you set up through COVID, but there was a moment at which, or was there a moment at which you feel like you were out of the crucible and you kind of had this relief of the pressure, and where you emerged and said, okay, that's behind me. I'm now out of the crucible. That doesn't mean that the pressures weren't still there, or there weren't new ones or different stressors, but that very specific crucible moment, was there a moment that you felt like you could look back and say, okay, I'm through that, and I'm very clear of my calling. The resources are now finally coming in, and I feel like we've got a plan ahead of us. Or did that take through 2023? Or are you still in it?
I remember the moment. It was October 14th, 2020. And that happens to be when H&H turned 10 years old. And the first 10 years had been, man, other than marriage, like the hardest thing. The early parts of marriage. It's harder than something that I thought that I could go through. And then the 10-year anniversary hits, and like normal, we're in the dry parts, end of September, early October. I'm to the point of the year where I'm normally praying for God to release me from this, and this is so hard. And I remember that wasn't my prayer that year. I just felt like something different was coming. And on the 10-year anniversary, I was praying. I was like, God, give me something. Like, I know you. You're my father. You got a gift for me. Give me something. Please give me. And just like a little kid would, the Bible says to do that. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to give that a shot. And then I remember he gave me the gift, and it was, you belong. You're not pretending. You've been doing this for 10 years. And then these are the words that stuck with me that I wrote down. It's like, all you got to do is keep showing up. And that was the moment for me when I knew that somehow I had, because in the beginning, like I told you, the first mission trip, like I fought my dad. I didn't want to go. And then at this point, I was a guy who had fought for what he believed the God-inspired dreams inside of him for 10 straight years through tons of hardship. And at some point between point A and point B, my identity changed. But I didn't realize it. Like, it didn't become something that I fully felt until that moment, that 10-year anniversary, when God was like, hey, you belong. Just keep showing up. That's when it felt like the weight lifted for me.
Yeah, so that was really, it was about a 10-year crucible. I mean, there's probably highs and lows in there, but that whole season was a crucible. And I do remember a specific, actually, I think it was when we went down to respond to the hurricanes, which would have either been that November of 2020 or the next year. Do you remember which one it was?
Yeah, that was November of 2020. Yeah, that was like the next month.
So we were on that trip together, and I remember you talking, I mean, you were talking differently. Like, I remember being inspired by you, because it's like you had resolved who you were, you seemed free in who you were, and you were still in the journey of exploration of this, but there was like a new identity that had emerged. I specifically remember that, and we had some conversations around that, and then that's only continued, over the last few years as we've continued to stay in touch. And so, yeah, I vividly remember. And I didn't put that together, that it was really the month before that was the 10-year anniversary, and hear this horrific hurricane, 2 of them back to back, smash Honduras, and we go down there, and just the timing of that, and me being able to spend that time with you and kind of seeing you in a new, and you were what, late 30s at that point, right? So for those listening, sometimes it takes a while, And there's going to be another chunk of crucible or season, that you're going to enter into, as will I. But the point is that being able to see how, if you look back, how God is taking that to shape your character, all these circumstances, and we have a choice within that, right? Like, you could have just quit, and I know you probably wanted to a lot. You're just like, I'm done, right?
If you guys could see the emotional energy I put in, because I know I'm going to meet God face to face one day. And I couldn't quit if he didn't tell me I could. I can't stand the thought of me being face to face and he's like, hey, you quit. And I was like, well, I just wanted to. Like, I'm not going to be that guy. But I put so much. I put 110% into praying for God to release me. And now, it's like you were saying with the crucible, and now I'm so thankful that he didn't. I'm so thankful that he's got an eternal perspective, that he really both sees, knows, and cares what's best for me.
Yeah.
Because
man.
if it was just me, like I would have quit it 1,000 times. I really would have. And he gave me the power not to.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, and just the fact that you spent so much energy praying for a way out,
Yeah.
and hopefully encouragement for those listening, like you just keep showing up. It's one day at a time, maybe sometimes 1 hour, 1 minute at a time. You just keep putting a foot in front of the other and you show up. Because there is something that's at work, even though we might not see it or feel it right in that moment, but there was a lot of work happening in you during that time. And it's probably nauseating to even think about being back in that time. It's painful.
It's hard. I mean, I've done a lot of therapy, so I try to be able to go back there because it's part of my testimony, and I like to share that power. But yeah, those were really, really hard years.
Yeah,
for sure.
Man, that's awesome. So you truly did emerge as a leader on fire because, a leader on fire is someone who is able to really believe and have the manifestation of the truth of Ephesians 2:10, which says, we are God's masterpiece, our baggage and all.
Amen.
We're his masterpiece. And to be able to live in that and to believe that and to know that he's got good things prepared in advance for us to do. But if we quit and we don't believe that and we don't keep putting a foot in front of the other, we won't get to experience that full abundant blessing. And then I love Ephesians 3:20. So I love marrying these two verses up together. Ephesians 3:20, that he's able to do immeasurably more than all we think, ask, or imagine according to the power of Christ that's within us. And so when you couple those two together, it's like it takes those crucible moments to really continue to shape our character, for us to be able to rest in that identity that we are his masterpiece. All the stuff that's happened in the past is a part of that masterpiece. And that's why I love the acronym lo-fi, because it's a musical term. And it's music that has imperfections left in the music to create a masterpiece. Otherwise, it wouldn't be that kind of music. And so, anyways, I love that story. So you emerged a leader on fire, and you've got a powerful story. You've got an amazing organization. And, being down there last week, seeing, I think you have a team of 18 Hondurans on the team down there. And just such an amazing team, a lot of great work going. And I was talking to my kids about you, and I'm going, you know what? Riley saw this, and he took a step. He just took one step forward, and look what's before you, and just the faithfulness of an individual to keep putting his foot in front of the other, and to be able to see what is now here and imagine what it's going to be in another decade, And so what a great testimony of your story. Now, you mentioned earlier in the episode about generous coffee, and I wanted to go a little further on that because it was in Honduras. It was me, you, and Ben sitting in the back of the truck. I think we were going down a road. I forget where we were at. And we were going, how can we create a mechanism, a giving mechanism, to help generate resources for H&H? And we thought coffee sounded like a good idea. I believe that was in 2016 or 17. And so for those who don't know the generous story, that vision was birthed in the trenches in Honduras with a couple guys who were just down there serving, 2 board members coming alongside you and saying, hey, what can we create that's going to be a giving mechanism? And now, of course, Generous is giving to a lot more organizations, but it was birthed out of this idea to help humanity and hope. And it's cool to see what they've got going on now here in Warsaw. So again, I would say that without that step that you took, Riley, Generous wouldn't even exist. And my mornings would be different because I love drinking Generous coffee every morning, and I have since we started it. And so I selfishly say thank you, Riley, for being faithful in Honduras. Otherwise, I would not have my cup of Generous coffee every morning. So cheers, brother.
And I would be sitting here shirtless. So.
That's true. Well, man, it's been awesome having you on the episode. I hope and pray that your story and your testimony speak to people, encourages them and inspires them. And also for people that don't know about Humanity and Hope, go to humanityandhopeunited.org, and you can see all the different things that H&H is doing. You can go on trips. You can feel that full story. And also in my book, All In, I shared a little bit. I opened up with your story, and I forget which chapter it was, but so man, we've
7
got
or 8, I think.
chapter. Yeah, I think it was 7 or 8. Good memory. So I appreciate you being a part of that. So we've got so many things in our lives that have intersected in ways we didn't really plan or intend years ago when we were just trying to be friends and living life together. So I love how our stories continue to overlap, and I'm looking forward to how it's going to continue to unfold. So thanks for coming and joining this, man. This is awesome.
Thanks for the invite, man. Looking forward to the next one.
All right. Appreciate you, brother. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Perhaps it has prompted a painful memory or challenged you to reflect on times you were in the crucible. Some of you may be in a crucible now, but be encouraged. Maybe, just maybe, God is using this to refine your character so that you emerge as a leader on fire. If today's episode was an encouragement to you, share it with others who may also find encouragement in the Leaders on Fire podcast. So, let's go into the world sent out as leaders on fire. Until next time.